Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech Podcast. It's me, Charlie Sell, Board Director for the Major Group, where I get a chance to speak to thought leaders, CTOs, people passionate about STEM, and people who are doing really interesting, fascinating things within our wider industry. So I'm really pleased to have Matt By with me today. Matt is the CTO of FLYR for Hospitality, and FLYR for Hospitality are an AI powered revenue management tool within the hospitality sector, going through really quite transformational things when we think about the power of AI. And I'm sure Matt will cover quite a bit of just the world that is AI and how business is capitalizing on it. So, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charlie. Good to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Let's jump straight in and tell us about your story. How did you get into technology?
Kind of by accident, really. So I was doing a physics degree at Southampton University, quite badly as it turns out, and then I left there, applied for a number of jobs back in the days when graduate programs were a thing, and ended up working for Ford Motor Company. I didn't really know what I was going to be doing there. I turned up on day one, still didn't really know what department I was joining. It turned out it was tech, or process leadership, as it was called. And I hated it to start with. I was working on a horrendous Excel-based application for pricing. Really didn't like it, and then moved on to some of the early .NET development work, which I absolutely loved, and that kind of set the tone really for the next part of my career. So yeah, that's how I got into it, totally by accident, which I imagine is quite a familiar story.
Yeah, and it really is, which is one of the wonderful things about tech now, that it's open to pretty much everybody if you can find your passion in it. So, but talk us a bit more of where you got to today then. So from moving in and learning in the .NET era, where did the career go from there?
So I was an engineer or developer, as they called it, for 4 or 5 years at Ford, and then moved to a company called Random House, who were a publishing house, a book distribution company, where I was the only Microsoft developer working in a team of mainframe engineers, trying to figure out how to get value out of some of those old mainframe files and putting a web front end on them. And so I was still doing development. And then I guess my first big, career break, came when I moved to Reed Business Information, part of Reed Elsevier, as a solutions architect, which was a kind of formal move into architecture, I guess. And I was lucky enough to work with some really good people there, like fantastic place, some fantastic people, and that really kind of consolidated my thought that solution architecture is where I wanted to be. So I ran the solution architecture team at RBI, and then moved and built it with some really strong people. And worked as a solution architect across their data product business. And then at the end of my career there, kind of, I guess, turned my career 90 degrees. So rather than working across all of these business divisions, I moved to work as a director of tech on one of those products, which was a big move, really, because it was a formal move into tech leadership, which was great. It's really a fantastic opportunity, and very grateful for them giving me that opportunity, really.
Great, and so from there into, how did you get into FLYR for hospitality?
I guess after RBI, I've been in a variety of tech leadership roles for the last sort of 10 or so years, and I've been consciously keeping my career quite diverse. So I think there can be a tendency to maybe stay in fintech if that's an area that's really passionate about. I've been consciously moving around industries, so I've worked on B2C side and the B2B side, and also in a range of industries and a range of sectors. So I find it interesting. I get bored quite easily, so it's always good to move around and find a new challenge in a new industry.
Great. And so one of the things we were talking about just before the podcast was, it's clear that you've transitioned and you've successfully transitioned from being that hands-on engineer, trying to find value through what pure tech can do, into leadership, and now obviously being responsible for people's careers, culture, many other facets that are more than just engineering. Talk to me a bit about how you found that, from scaling teams to stepping in from engineering into leadership.
yeah, it's a good question, and I think I've worked with quite a lot of people over the years who are making that transition. I think it's probably one of the kind of the big unrecognized hurdles in a tech career. I think we're really fortunate these days that individual contributor IC roles typically have a career path that's parallel to and valued as much as the management track in a business, right? Which is very different to, 50 years ago, where the only way up was to become a manager, and that was the death of any kind of hands-on contribution. So I think we're in a reasonably good place, but I think it's still quite an unsupported transition. I think it's really tough for people to leave behind. You're abandoning something that's defined your career and defined your deliverables for presumably a significant number of years, and you're having to then take on all this quite terrifying responsibilities. You say people's careers, people's development. You're having to lead a team, which you might not have done before, and I think it's just generally a very tough transition for people to make. And I think the worst thing that can happen is people fall into that by accident, right? So they kind of accidentally end up being a leader, and then one day they wake up and they go, "Oh my god, all these people are looking up to me for direction, and I have to do appraisals, and I have to, think about recruiting, and I have to think about disciplinaries, and I didn't really intend to do that." So I think it is a really tough decision. I think I'm working with some people at the moment to get them through that transition, and it's tough, right? It's something you don't expect to be hard, and it really is.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the nice thing, or the thing about leadership, is it's transferable across every industry, every job, every sector, isn't it? That ability to be able to learn the skills to be able to inspire, manage, and discipline, and do both the tough conversations as much as it is about creating culture. And so, thinking about culture and the teams that you've led, and obviously knowing your leadership style, which is obviously very supportive, what are the best type of cultures that you've worked in, and what sets them apart from other businesses or other cultures?
I think it's quite hard to answer that question without reeling out a load of kind of trite corporate speak. I think the but honestly, I think the best kind of cultures are the ones where they're ultimately based on trust. And I think there's a huge difference now between the trust-based cultures that genuinely are harder to get in place. They're harder to manage. They're harder to build. There's a huge contrast now between those and, I shouldn't say it, but the sort of very top-down kind of command and control, almost, the kind of old school, I guess, cultures that historically you do see in big corporates. And it's quite easy to say, a trust based culture is the way to go, and that's the best place to work. But I think it does take a lot from management to make that happen, because you have to genuinely trust the people, right? You have to trust them to spend the money as if it was their own. You have to trust them to work responsibly if they're working remotely. You have to trust them to deliver and to effectively mark their own homework as a team. And I think that's quite a lot to let go of for some managers. And to be completely honest, I think some CEOs, I think, really struggle to embrace that. They really struggle to devolve responsibility to the teams in a way that empowers them, in a way that lets them do their job the best way. And I think lots of people fail. Lots of people are still very much focused on wanting bums on seats and wanting to walk around the office and check that people are doing what they're doing. And I think that's such an old school way of working. I think there are better ways to get stuff done.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more on that last point, that the the old school world of bums on seats, and you've got to be seen to be heard, and all of these old cliches, or versus the world now of retrospectives and accountability, and if you get it right, as you said, teams will mark their own homeworks, and actually if you get it right within cultures, and the team is a high performing team and it's a trusted team, you won't want to let each other down, will you? So it's about creating that culture, and actually that's quite a nice thing to hear, or to get your point on, when you've got remote teams or when you're building a culture built on trust. What have been your successes, but what are also the challenges of trying to retain a culture when you're not all in the office 5 days a week, 7 hours a day?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, I've been in a number of roles over the last few years, and it's been very interesting to see the different approaches to this kind of new world of remote, hybrid, whatever you call it, working. I think obviously there were the COVID years, kind of lost years that everyone was working remotely through, and that kind of worked reasonably well. I think we've obviously seen a push recently to get people back into the office, and I think remote working is fantastic. The ability to, to not have to commute, or the ability to work from home and not commute is amazing. And it's, it's a huge change for the better, I think. I think what people are missing is the value of collaborating face to face when it makes sense. I think clearly it's easy for companies to mandate a return to the office, and that's quite an easy way to get people together. I'm not necessarily sure it's the most effective way. I think if you can, and it comes back to trust, right? If you can trust the team to figure out collectively when it makes most sense for them to get together and to leverage the ability to get together when they really need to, I think that makes it makes a lot more sense and is a lot more powerful. So at FLYR for Hospitality, what we've historically done is say to the teams, you have a budget every month, or every quarter rather, where you can use that as a team, agree how you use it as a team, get together and use that time responsibly. And it's it's a lot of cash, it's a lot of investment, it's a lot of trust that we're putting in these people. But uniformly, they have all been amazing at responsibly organising those get-togethers and making the best out of it. And we had a team go to Barcelona. We had a team go to Madrid. We had a team in London for a few days, and it was really good to see, and really encouraging to see that trust that we put in the teams as an exec management team. It's just amazing to see people really embracing that and taking it on. And I think the feedback from the teams was, they enjoyed organising that. It was great to get together. They could see the benefit in it. They didn't feel forced to do it because they could choose when they did it. It was just really nice. It was really nice to see people acting as grown-ups and taking responsibility for it. But it's hard. I mean, and our founders, Jason and Jens, have done an amazing job of empowering people and trusting people and treating people like adults. But I don't think it's something you can do once, and you have to continue working at that, right? You have to keep avoiding that top-down command and control piece, and just and making sure you do trust people.
Yeah. And again, I couldn't agree with you more. We'll keep coming back to the word trust, but trust is given, not earned, is one of the other things I say quite a lot.
Agree.
And if you get that right, then you've got people bought in from day one. And I think the other challenge, and maybe you've come across this as well, is you're always going to hire one or two bad apples accidentally for whatever reason, and what companies and people shouldn't do is let one bad actor, one bad experience, and suddenly change what you're trying to fundamentally build, which is what I see quite often.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point. I mean, and I had this conversation a few roles ago, and I mean, firstly, occasionally if you're really unlucky, that person. Occasionally, get people who are malicious. I just don't think that's really very commonplace. I think what's really most likely is the way the company wants to work and the way that person wants to work probably just don't match, right? And just because a person doesn't work or doesn't gel with the team, and you have to make a change in one place, doesn't mean that they can't be an amazing employee somewhere else. I think it's just the alignment's just not there, and you need to have a grown-up conversation about that. I think also when you're putting a team together, quite often you're recruiting, and I've obviously been doing that a lot recently. As you're recruiting, it can be quite easy to, you don't go down to the blue box shop and buy 6 blue boxes, do you? That engineers, people in teams are not all uniform; they're all different, and so the first couple of people you bring into a team, that will dictate or influence at least the sort of the next characters, the next types of people you're looking for. So I think it's really tough to structure a team properly and to make sure you get the right blend of people, because that's an ever changing thing. I think it's tough. It's a bit of an art, I think.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point actually. That it's an evolving,
Yeah,
the dynamics evolve as you grow or bring in different personalities. In fact, that's quite a unique way of looking at it because far too often, and relating this back to many of our listeners who are thinking about getting their foot in the door or starting their careers within engineering, you know, you've got to be your authentic self, don't you? There's no point
yeah,
trying to be someone that you're not to try and fit into a perception because the chances are, A, it'll be the wrong culture for you, but B, that may not be the right mix for what they're looking for. You're second guessing. So,
yeah.
do you see that a lot? That there's a challenge or a job to do to make sure people are being authentic to themselves rather than saying what they think that people want to hear or see or do.
I think so. I mean, it's I think it's a really tough balance because I think you have there. Yes, people should be able to come to work and be their authentic self. Absolutely support that. I think on the flip side, there is, a general standard of interaction that we would expect and that we need in a corporate environment, and that changes depending on role or depending on the stage of the company. But I think you know, it's kind of it's a bit of a trade, right? I think you need to let people be their authentic self at work. I think you also expect from the employees some minimums in terms of interaction and behaviour, and I think that's always been the case, right? I think it's there's always been those expectations. I think they have widened recently though and become a lot more accommodating recently, which I think is really good.
Yeah, yeah. And again, very, very valid point. So, time flies when we have these type of conversations, and I could carry on forever about culture, but let's move on to the career advice. So for many of our listeners who, are thinking about trying to get either their foot in the door or it's a second job, and as you said, you've been doing a lot of hiring at the moment. What one or two bits of advice could you give to help people stand out or just get that further opportunity.
So I guess there are two. I was thinking about this previous to our chat. I think there are two. I think the first one, and I learned this, unsuspectingly, I learned this quite early in my career, and I think it's probably influenced a lot of my interactions and conversations since then. So I was working at Ford, and I was working with a senior contractor on some horrible VB6 development, and I remember him asking me a bunch of questions about how whether I knew certain parts of the system. And at the time, I perceived that as a bit of an interrogation and a bit of it kind of annoyed me a little bit. And then I realised that what he was doing, he wasn't trying to belittle me, and he wasn't trying to test my knowledge or show that he was better. He was just purely trying to level set the conversation. And I remember him asking me, did I know it was something about com plus objects for those who remember those things? It was something about, he said, do you know how this works? And I realized at that point that I had an option. I could either go yes and try and blag it, or I could say, no, I don't. And I said no. And he just went, oh, yeah, that's fine, absolutely. And then just level set the conversation and continued explaining it. And I think, there's a lot of store, I think, set by the hustle culture and the kind of fake it till you make it kind of approach. And I think, yeah, that might get you a certain distance. I think my first piece of advice to people who are looking to get into tech is just be upfront about what you don't know. We're not, I think tech generally is full of very accommodating, very welcoming people. Just be honest about what you don't know. Just be honest about if you're not sure about something, if you don't know, ask, but don't try and blag it because you will trip over it later on. And people aren't broadly trying to score points; they're trying to help, and it just helps to be honest about what you know and what you don't know. So that's number one, I think.
Fantastic.
And then number two, I guess it's probably more applicable to people who've just started at a business or who've just started a job. I think we're in tech. We build software. We build products that push the business forward. It's a hugely important part of industry now. I think my second piece of advice would be follow the money and understand how the business works. Even if you're an engineer who's working on some really detailed back-end systems, like understand how the business works, understand why you're building what you're building. And that's really useful for two reasons. One, it will help you build better software in that you can figure out whether, are you building something that's going to be there for 10 years? Are you building something that's only going to be there for 10 weeks? Is it a proof of concept? What is it? So try and understand why you're building it and where the business is going. And I think it also helps you communicate with people who aren't in tech, because if you're trying to explain to non-technical people why it's better to over-engineer or under-engineer something, if you can put it in financial terms or at least general business terms, it really helps. So understand the business direction, understand what's important, understand what's a priority, understand where the growth is, understand how the financials work, I think is something that's missed quite a lot by people in engineering, and is really, really helpful. I found it to be really useful.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I think both of those points are absolutely spot on, and actually quite different. There's two takes there that we haven't discussed a lot in previous podcasts, but really, really stand out. So, wow, look, time has flown by, and
20 minutes, impressive.
as always. So, look, Matt, thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast.
No, thank you for the invite. It's been great.
And to our listeners, that is another episode of the Future Tech podcast. As we know, it is shared with the STEM Ambassador Association. It's also on our website, majorgroup.com/podcast. And it's just over to me to say one more time a massive thank you to Matt for being on the show. And that's another episode of Future Tech. Thank you.